see here. Okay. For those that are here, we'll have week in verse 8. Well, actually, week before last. And we're looking at the latter part of the verse. It says, I will make a wailing like the dragons and mourning as the owls. All the new Bibles have changed the word dragons to jackals or dogs or owls. Owls, I should say, have become ostriches. And the reason why is because none of them believe that there's dragons. And I don't know, it says the mourning as the owls. I don't know how a ostrich mourns, but maybe it does. And then the CEV says howling wolves. Anything but what's there in the text. And like I said, the modern scholar does not believe in dragons. And even though the Bible speaks of them everywhere, and Satan himself is called the dragon in Revelation 12, they just don't believe what they read. So they got to change it, make you think that they're intelligent. And what they're really doing is showing their stupidity. In verse 9, he says, for her wound is incurable, for it is come unto Judah. He has come up from the gates of my people, even to Jerusalem. So Samaria and Judah have incurable wounds. Look over here to the book of Nehemiah. I'm sorry, not the book of Nehemiah, Nahum. And look at verse, let's see, I'm going to find Nehemiah 3, and look at verse 19. There is no healing of thy bruise. Thy wound is grievous. All that hear the bruit of thee shall clap the hands over thee. For upon whom hath not thy wickedness passed continually? And of course, speaking to the nation of Israel. What did he, when we read that, did you catch what he called that bruise or what he called that wound? Incurable. That means there's no cure for it. Not trying to be smart. It just means there's no cure for it. I'm sure somebody thinks there's a cure for it, but there isn't. Let's turn to Jeremiah a minute, chapter 11. Jeremiah chapter 11. In verse 14. Therefore pray not thou for this people, neither lift up thy cry or prayer for them, for I will not hear them in time that they cry unto me for their trouble. And look at chapter 14 of Jeremiah, verse 11, so just the reverse. 14, verse 11. Then said the Lord unto me, pray not for this people, for their good. So God tells Jeremiah not to do what? So when God decides he will not hear your prayer, would you suspect the situation was incurable? And, you know, if you listen long enough to the world, you'd think that God never does anything negative. Well, I'm sorry. You need to read it again. God makes a lot of things. He tells people that if they won't obey him and obey his commandments, then he'll curse them. That seems pretty negative. In verse 10, pretty plain if you stop to think about it. Let's read it here. I got to get back to my place, I guess. He says, declare ye it not at Gath, weep ye not at all in the house of Aphrah. Roll thyself in dust. So we see there's no need to publish what we lost our enemies, for there's nothing that can stop it or halt it. Weep not at all, simply put in crying will do no good. So the Lord is saying, just go ahead and weep, but it's not going to do you any good. As a father, I often said to my children sometimes, you can go ahead and cry, but that's not going to change what's going to happen. And sometimes we whine enough about something that God says, well, that's the consequences. Notice something in Ezekiel 24. Ezekiel 24. Now I realize that this study of Micah is not exciting. But when you're looking at the end of the nation of Israel and the final prophets of that day, there wasn't anything good to report. Israel was going into had gone into apostasy. Judah was headed that way. So there's nothing good to report. When you're going into apostasy, how do you find something, for the most part, good there? But here in Ezekiel chapter 24, and look at verse 16. Son of man, behold, I take away from thee the desire of thine eyes with a stroke. That's his wife, by the way. Yet neither shalt thou mourn nor weep, neither shall thy tears run down. How about that? The Lord says, Ezekiel, I'm going to do something. I'm going to take your wife for a stroke, and I don't want you to mourn over it or cry over it. And you know, the example was what he was going to do to Israel. Simply saying, you know, when he came to Jerusalem, you remember what he did in the New Testament when he came to Jerusalem? He wept over it. But here in the Old Testament, when they were going into apostasy, he didn't weep over it. And his example was, I'm going to take your wife and you don't cry for her. Now, I don't know how Ezekiel did that, but he did it. I'd have a hard time with that one. To roll yourself in the dust. I think if you look back in some places, is somebody in a repentant spirit and a sorrowful spirit. All this invasion by Sennacherib came from the north Samaria to the gates of Jerusalem, verse 9, and led to the captivity of Israel in 721. So Micaiah is delivering the mail, so to speak. This is the end. He said, this is what's going to happen to you. I think America right now thinks that they're going to get out of this morass they're in. Nope. You think $3.87 is high, you just wait till they get done with you. You think your food is high, wait till they get done. And that's the current leadership you have in America that's doing this to you. So Micaiah is delivering the message, and Micah is delivering the message, and nobody's excited about the message he's delivering. And why would they be? You don't see the news media giving you positive or negative stuff about what's going on. They can't even find anything negative about the Ukraine. That's a mess. And it's going to get worse. Verse 11. Pass ye away, thou inhabitants of Sephar, having thy shame naked. The inhabitants of Zaanan came not forth in the morning of Beth Ezel. He shall receive of you by his standing. I really don't know all there is in this verse, to be honest with you, but let me give you a try. Sephar is a city in the way of the invasion. He tells them to pass you away or keep out of the way, move on. Apparently they've been attacked and are, if you will, please, naked at this point. Seems that Zaanan did not come and mourn for Beth Ezel, so it appears that they will take the place of Beth Ezel. Again, that's just a guess on my part. There's just there's too much figurative words there. I can't get it all out. In verse 12, he says, "For the inhabitants of Maroth waited carefully for good, but evil came down from the Lord upon the gates of Jerusalem." The gate of Jerusalem, sorry. I think it's pretty clear. Maroth thought they could escape the wrath of Sennacherib, and they waited for things to be better. However, they received a big shock when the evil arrived from the gate of Jerusalem. And again, that's the best I can do with that verse. I really don't know. You'd have to study Sennacherib and what he did to get all of it. And ancient history is not most people's forte. Verse 13, "O thou inhabitant of Lachish, bind the chariot to the swift beast. She is the beginning of sin to the daughters of Zion, for the transgression of Israel were found in thee." So Lachish is the beginning of sin to the daughter of Zion. Now, I don't know if you know anything about a map. Let me just see if you've got a map of Israel. Maybe when the 12 tribes were in existence. If you do, you go down to Judah, where Judah is the bottom of Israel. Find the Salt Sea and just go to your left. And you should see a place called Gath in the Philistines. You see that? Anybody got that map there? And you'll see just south of Gath, Lachish. Lachish is about 25 to 30 miles west of Hebron. If you follow over to the right, you'll see Lachish, and go over to the right, Hebron, and that's connected to Abraham. What I'm trying to do is show you where he's at when he's talking. Lachish, bind the chariot of the swift beast. She is the beginning of sin to the daughter of Zion. So what he's saying is, Lachish is the reason for the mess that the people are in. It's the Philistine coast. Remember, Solomon took Pharaoh's daughter to wife, and he took some other heathen women besides that, and brought all sorts of heathenistic worship. The Lord said all of this paganism was found in Lachish and brought to Jerusalem. So it's their fault, he said. They brought it. So they're going to be paying for it. Bind the chariot to the swift beast. She is the beginning of sin. Therefore, verse 14, by the way, he says, "Therefore shalt thou give presents to Moresheth-Gath, and the houses of Achzib shall be a lie to the king of Israel." Now, again, a tough thing here. But if I understand it right, it appears Lachish is trying to buy or bribe help from Moresheth-Gath, but gets none. What it does is ends up with getting a lie. I'm going to help you, and then doesn't show up. And again, I know this is not exciting material, but it's history. It's went on in Israel before the 400 years of silence came along. Verse 15, "Yet will I bring an heir unto thee, O inhabitants of Marisha. He shall come unto Adullam, the glory of Israel." Historical reference to Sennacherib, and also a reference to the second advent, if you know anything about that. Notice he says, "He shall come unto Adullam, the glory of Israel." So no doubt a reference to the second advent, the coming of the Lord. And I don't understand, if you read a lot of the Old Testament, God makes reference to what he's going to do to a city in the future. And you kind of wonder sometimes, why does God care about a city in the future? But what you do when you look at this, you'll find that many of these cities were enemies of Israel. And because they didn't treat Israel right, God's going to someday come and fix their wagon, so to speak. And so when you're reading some of this, you're reading it and you're getting figurative language because it's actual history. It took place, but there's also a future reference to it. And I think that's what that glory of Israel is. He is no doubt the heir which is being spoken of. However, I can't be certain of that fact. And just for your information, this is only the only time in the Bible where that phrase, the glory of Israel, appears. Doesn't appear anywhere else. So probably all the new Bibles changed it. Make thee bald and poll thee for thy delicate children, Enlarge thy baldness as the eagle, for thou art gone into captivity from thee. So it's the terrible results of war. Whatever is going on is not pleasant or enjoyable. Making yourself bald is a sign of distress and suffering. Look at Ezra, chapter 9. And verse 3. And when I heard this thing, I rent my garment and my mantle, and watch this, and plucked off the hair of my head and of my beard, and sat down astonied. I'd say he's in distress and grief. I mean, getting your hair cut off is one thing. Pulling your hair out is quite another thing. And I don't think anybody I know of in here wants to pull their hair out. We have said this. I felt like pulling my hair out. And let's look also at the book of Job, chapter 1. After several things have happened to Job in the first part of this thing, the Bible says in verse 20, then Job arose and rent his mantle, so there it is, and shaved his head. Okay, he didn't pull it out. And fell down upon the ground and what? So it's a sign of distress. It's a sign of mourning. It's a sign of suffering. And I've always thought it's interesting. To me, you read in the Bible and it says that he ripped his mantle or ripped his whatever. And I thought, man, they must have bought a lot of clothes. Or maybe it's a figurative speaking. They didn't really... you can say this, you can say he ripped his shirt off. It doesn't mean he actually ripped it off. It means he took it off. So a lot of times when I read that, I take it that he didn't rip it up in pieces, but that when he ripped it off, he took his garment off. He was in a haste to take it off. All right, chapter 2. Chapter 1, that God was going to deal, if you remember, about the transgressions of Israel. And I said there were several of them that we would deal with when we came through there. So in this verse, he deals with the transgression of fornication. Note the warning cry is, woe to those that devise iniquity. So the warning to those that fool around in iniquitous stuff. He states that they do it, the evil, because it is in the power of their hands to do it. So what's that mean? Nobody's stopping them. There's no stopping them. They do what they want. And I don't know if you know much about what goes on in this country, but people pretty much do what they want, especially if they're wicked. You might remember one of the 4 things that the council advised Paul and Barnabas to warn the Gentiles of was to avoid the sin of fornication. If you go back to the Old Testament or New Testament and read where Paul was sent out, you find they were warned at least twice to tell the Gentiles to abstain from, don't get involved in it. And what's interesting about that, I began to search it out. The word fornication is mentioned 4 times in the Old Testament, but look at this, 32 times in the New Testament. So I think there's something there of the church in this age and the people of this age. And you do know, don't you, that there is, of course, when you speak of fornication, we think of the physical act, but there also is the spiritual. And a lot of people have committed the act of fornication, never did anything physical, but it's what they've done in relationship to the Lord. Verse 2 says, and they coveted fields and take them by violence, and houses and take them away. So they oppress a man and his house, even a man and his inheritance. His heritage, I'm sorry. The third transgression that we see in this is the sin of stealing property. Would you believe that? In this country, it's called eminent domain. You know what that means? That means that if your property is in the way of a highway that the state's putting in, they have a right to take your property. And I knew a fellow in Florida that they did that when they put I-10 through Pensacola. They took his house. And he fought him. He went to court, and I told him, I said, Booker, you just might as well take the money they're giving you because they're going to win, and you're going to end up in the less. You say, well, that's not right. Well, I agree with you. I agree 100% that's not right, but that's what they call it, eminent domain. They just had it, what was it, 2 or 3 years ago out west? That guy ended up getting shot. They took his property. So God said, I'm against it. The state has a right to any time they want, and nothing you can say about it. Take the offer or leave it because they're legal thieves. The state is a legal thief. In 2b it says, and so they oppress a man in his house, even a man in his heritage. I believe the latter part of the verse doesn't really need any explanation. They oppress you, they steal your inheritance, and you must comply. They call it their right. The Lord calls it stealing. Look at 1 Kings a minute. Let's see if that isn't something that does. First Kings 22, I believe it is. First Kings 22. Okay, let me, yeah, I'm just trying to figure where I want to start reading. Well, let's see. That is not what I'm wanting. Chapter 21? Okay. Yeah, that's it. Okay, I don't know. I got 22 written there, so I'll have to white that out. All right. You know this is about Ahab, but let's just start reading verse 5. He says, But Jezebel, his wife, came to him and said unto him, Why is thy spirit so sad? Thou eatest no bread. And he said unto her, Because I spake unto Naboth, the Jezreelite, and said unto him, Give me thy vineyard for money, or else if it please thee, I will give thee another vineyard for it. And he answered, I will not give thee my vineyard. And Jezebel his wife said unto him, Dost thou not governor the kingdom of Israel? Aren't you the state? And arise and eat bread, and let thine heart be merry. I will give thee the vineyard to Naboth the Jezreelite. So she wrote the letter in Ahab's name, and sealed them in his seal, and sent the letters unto the elders and to the nobles that were in the city dwelling with Naboth. And she wrote in the letter, saying, Proclaim a fast, and set Naboth on the high among the people, and sent 2 men, sons of Belial, before him to bear witness against him. So she hires liars. And the state's been known to do that. So I'm just trying to show you here is what happened is Naboth's vineyard, he said, it's my heritage. Now you got to go back into, well, Deuteronomy is one place, but you got to go back and realize where the Lord said, I'm going to give you this land. It is your land. It is your heritage. It doesn't belong to anybody else. Remember when those was it 7 girls or 5 girls, and they didn't have any brothers and no way to carry on. They had to marry within the family to keep the heritage of the fathers. So that's what Naboth's talking about. This is my heritage. I can't sell it to you. I can't give it away because they weren't allowed to. The Lord would not allow them to do it. So in order for the state to get it, they had to lie about it and steal it. Verse 3. Therefore, thus saith the Lord. I want to get a sermon. Behold, against this family, that would be Jacob, Judah, do I devise an evil from which ye shall not remove your necks. Neither shall you go haughty, for this time is evil. So it appears to me that this family, and speaking of course, Jacob, if you look back at chapter 1, verse 5, and verse 7 of this chapter, they're going to get what they dished out, evil for evil. Turn back to 1 Samuel a minute. 1 Samuel. But the soul of the Lord shall be bound in the bundle of life with the Lord God. The soul of thine enemies shall be slung out as out of the middle of a sling. So returning the evil that was given to him. And I don't know, I have an idea when he says, for this evil time, is going to have something to do with, again, tribulation. You've got to remember, this is, all the Old Testament is a eventual testimony of what's going to happen in the tribulation. Now, not everything on every word and every page and every book, but God puts it in there from time to time to remind you that one of these days, the payment is going to come back. There is nothing going on. You know, the Prime Minister of Ukraine is a Jew. And he has said from the very beginning that we're going to win because we have the truth. And we've prayed to our God. I don't know. I'd have to study him a little bit more to see what he said about that, because some of the Jews don't have the same God. But I was thinking about that. I think, the Lord's sitting up there in heaven watching this go on. And there's one of his people getting, you remember, they're going to get punished. That's what the tribulation period's all about. And at the same time, you might want to help the guy out. I'm just saying, brother, and this book not only tells you what's happened in the past, but it tells you what's currently happening, and it's going to tell you what's going to happen in the future. And my estimation of Mr. Putin is that he won't stop with Ukraine, okay? Because he wants back the original USSR. That's what he's fighting for. And I think he's demented, but that's just my personal opinion. Nobody could kill civilians who aren't even armed if they have any mind at all. Verse 4. In that day, do I need to say anything further? What is that word I've taught you over the years? That day, this day. Those are references to Second Advent, most always. So he says, in that day shall one take up a parable against you and lament with a doleful lamentation and say, we be utterly spoiled. He has changed the portion of my people. How hath he removed it from me? And notice that's not a question. That's a statement. Turn away, he hath divided our field. Now, I don't know all the stuff in this verse. I just know this. It has Advent reference, in that day. If you study the Bible, you know that that day is almost always a second Advent. Of course, the lamentation spoken of is mentioned many times in the Old Testament in reference to Israel's sorrowful days that lay ahead. You know this, but I'll just tell you, probably the greatest book on this, the book of Lamentations. The second book is going to be the book of Jeremiah. Then you're going to look at the book of Ezekiel, where God pretty well disowned his people. But there's a doleful lamentation. Why? Because of what's happening. After the Second World War was over, and Eisenhower had the news media come in and take pictures of the dead Jews that were buried in pits, and the people that were starving to death, half of them naked. He said he wanted to remind the world of what took place, because down the road they would deny that it ever happened. And that's pretty much what come to pass here a few years ago. They began to deny the fact that it ever happened. But you talk about a doleful lamentation. Never underestimate God. Verse 5. Therefore thou shalt have none that shall cast a cord by lot in the congregation of the Lord. Now, it took me a little while. I had to do some research to find some stuff. That verse really threw me for a loop. But let's read it again. Therefore thou shalt have none that shall cast a cord by lot. See, there's no punctuation there that separates that statement. It's all one statement. So therefore thou shalt have none, thou shalt cast a cord. And one thing I looked at said that casting a cord would be the surveyor's chain. He marks the thing, and in wherever that fell meant what you got. And he said this, when they lay out the measurement, you get none. You end up with none. And I'll show you how that works. Turn over to Matthew 25 a minute. You got to keep in mind that while you're talking about quote-unquote political history, this is also biblical history. You do realize, do you not, that any church history or any history is really church history. You can't have history without church history because everything is about God. And where the world gets all messed up is they cut God out. When you cut God out, now you don't have any history whatsoever. Matthew 25, in verse 31, I will not read all of this to you, but in verse 31 he says, when the Son of Man shall come in his glory, remember that glory of Israel back over there in the chapter we just got through looking at, and all the holy angels with him, then he shall sit upon the throne of glory. And before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate the one from the other, as the shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on the right hand, but the goats on the left. Then shall the king say unto them on the right hand, come, ye blessed of the Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Oh, isn't that an interesting statement? The kingdom was prepared for somebody else, not you and me. For I was hungered, and you gave me meat. I was thirsty. Page stuck together. And you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you took me in. Naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came unto me. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee a hungered, and fed thee, and thirsty, and gave thee drink? When saw we thee a stranger, and took thee in, or naked, and clothed thee? Or when saw we thee sick, or in prison, and came unto thee? And the king said, and the king shall answer and say unto them, verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of these, the least of my brethren, ye have done unto me. And he goes down through there, and then he tells the goats, you get nothing because you didn't do anything. So that's what I'm referencing to when he said here, he was going to cast a cord by lot in the congregation of the Lord. So thou shalt have none, he said. Why? Because of what they'd done to his people. Verse 6, prophesy ye not, say they to them that prophesy. They shall not prophesy to them, that they shall not take the shame. Actually not hard at all. He's just telling those people who are prophesying to quit prophesying. Look over the book of Amos a minute. Amos 5. Not anything new. It's about the same thing as somebody driving down the street corner telling you to quit preaching. Same. They don't want the prophet to say anything because it brings conviction. But here in chapter 5 in Amos, in verse 12, he says, For I know your manifold transgressions, your mighty sins, they have afflict and just, they take a bribe and they turn. That's not the verse. Well, I'm going to have to check myself when I write stuff down. Okay, what I wanted to get was where they told Amos to quit preaching. And I thought I looked that up. And it's not verse 21. I thought, well, maybe I turned it around. Well, okay. Guess you weren't supposed to get that verse. Because I do not see it here. Well, let's go to Hosea and see if I got that one right. Nine, 7. The days of visitation are come, the days of recompense are come. Israel shall know it. The prophet is a fool, the spiritual man is mad, for the multitude of iniquities and of great hatred. So, it doesn't have much to do with the prophet. He's a madman. Yeah, the verse I wanted in Amos was to deal with where he told him to quit preaching. But for whatever reason, it's not there. So back to Micah. Prophesy not. Let me just check one more thing. Nope, that's not it either. Okay, I'll have to go back and look it up. Verse 7. O thou art named the house of Jacob. Is the spirit of the Lord straitened? Are these his doings? Do not my words do good to him that walketh uprightly? So, simply put, he said, is what's going on, is this what the Lord's doing? Is what's happening to Jacob God's doings? The truth is, yes, it is. He allowed things to happen because the family wanted it. Do you think things happen in our country because it's what Americans wanted? It's not what God wanted, not what God's word said, but it's what they wanted. God will let you have what you want. You may not want it after you get it, but what you're getting is what you wanted. They refuse to obey his commandments. And yet does not his word do good to those that would walk uprightly? Well, the answer, of course, is what? Yes, God will do right to those who walk uprightly. But just at the same time, the punishment that comes from the Lord just as much. Why? Because he asked you to obey his commandments and you didn't. It's a simple fact that happens day in, day out in a home where a father says, okay, because you didn't do right, you're not going to be able to go here, or be able to do this, or be able to do that. Because they wouldn't listen. Even of late, my people is risen up as an enemy, and you pull off the robe with the garment from them that pass by securely as men adverse from war. The women of my people have you have cast out of their pleasant houses. From their children you have taken away my glory forever. So, what's going on here? God said they had risen up and was his enemy. Why? They were stealing, pulling off the robe, and then casting women from their houses, robbery. Not only that, it was a literal thing going on, and they had depraved the children of his glory. Look what he says. From the children they have taken away my glory forever. Now, if you want to mess with somebody, why don't you mess with an adult? The Lord can handle that. But when you mess with the children, he doesn't handle that. Remember what he said about the children over there in Matthew 18? It'd be better that a man had a millstone hanging around his neck than to offend one of these little ones. So he says to this nation of people, he said, you've risen up as an enemy. You pull off the robe with the garment from them that passed by securely. You've done it in the open. You're a thief in the open. The women of my people have you cast out from their pleasant houses. Well, you come along and say that belongs to us. It doesn't belong to you. War has a terrible result to it. And the enemy has a right to do whatever they want and take whatever they want. It's called the spoils of war. And if you read about it in Judges and you read about it in Joshua, about the spoil of war, taking from the enemy what it was, probably Vietnam they didn't do it, but World War II and maybe even Korea, guys came home with helmets and guns and ammunition and stuff. What? It's the spoil of war. They had a right to it. They won. They beat the enemy. So what's going on here is kind of the spoils of war. It's kind of what happens when you come up against a nation and you don't win. Right now, I'll guarantee you right now, the Russian soldiers are taking a lot of spoil of war. And in some cases, it happens to be women and children. So it's nothing pretty about what's going on here. And when he's reporting, he's telling you the situation that's occurring because of what Sennacherib did when he came in. But also, like I said, as you read it, you have to read in there some lines here and there that this is also a prophecy of what's going to happen in the future. And I don't know what's actually happening for sure in Ukraine and Russia, but I know China is itching to do something. And if China gets into it and gets itching to do something, I think it's probably time to listen for the trumpet. All right? All right. I'll give you the